My wife, Sharon Langford, passed away 4 months ago after 31 years of marriage. She was 65. After my wife died, I took her watch to the jeweler, a family friend, for repair. He locked the door and pulled me into a back room. He whispered, "Don't go home until you read her will you're next." What he handed me over on the counter made my hands go ice cold. I had walked into that small shop in the suburbs of Syracuse, thinking it was just another ordinary errand. The watch was the one Sharon wore every single day, the one she never took off, even when she was sick. I wanted it fixed so I could keep wearing it myself, a small way to hold on to her. The moment he opened the case, his face changed. His hand stopped moving. He looked up at me with eyes I had never seen before on a man who had known us for over 20 years. Without a word, he stood up, walked to the front door, flipped the lock, and led me straight to the back room. His voice dropped to a whisper that sent a chill down my spine. He pushed a small envelope across the counter toward me. Inside it was something I never expected to see. My fingers went numb the second I touched it. If you have ever felt that something in your own family just doesn't add up, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit like and subscribe right now so you don't miss what happened next. I drove straight home from the jeweler's shop with that small envelope still burning a hole in my coat pocket. The familiar route through the quiet neighborhoods of suburban Syracuse felt longer than usual, each stop sign giving me too much time to think about what had just happened in the back room. Once inside the house, I went directly to the study on the second floor without even taking off my coat. Sharon had always kept our important papers organized in the old oak desk, positioned by the window overlooking the backyard. I sat at her usual spot, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out the folder we had labeled Last Will and Testament years ago. The moment I opened it, I realized this was not the version we had both reviewed and signed together 8 years earlier during our estate planning session with the attorney. This document carried a date from just 6 months before Sharon passed. She had made substantial revisions on her own, without mentioning a single word to me. I adjusted the reading lamp and started going through every single page line by line. The changes were significant and methodical. Sections that previously divided the main assets equally between our 2 children now included new conditions and restrictions. Certain investment accounts and the family property were redirected with clauses that required verification of circumstances before any transfer could occur. I read the language carefully, noting how Sharon had added paragraphs about responsible management and long-term protection for the family. As I reached the final page of the will, my eyes caught a small key carefully taped to the inside back cover. The key fit perfectly into a narrow locked compartment built into the side of the desk, a detail I had almost forgotten existed. When I opened the compartment, a thick manila folder slid out. On the tab, Sharon had written only her initials in her precise, steady handwriting. I spread the contents across the desk. The folder contained dozens of printed emails, handwritten notes on various slips of paper, bank statements, and medical receipts spanning nearly 2 years. The earliest email was addressed to her lawyer, Linda Ellis. In it, Sharon requested a confidential appointment to review and modify her estate plan, explaining she had developed serious concerns regarding our son's approach to financial matters and decision-making. I continued turning through the pages. Several notes in Sharon's handwriting described specific occasions when she experienced unusual fatigue and dizziness shortly after Thomas stopped by with bags of groceries or prepared meals. One entry mentioned how she had observed him spending extra time in the kitchen during one visit. though she never said anything at the moment. Another page listed dates and times when her symptoms intensified, always correlating with periods when Thomas had been present in the house. Further into the stack were copies of prescription records for her heart medication. Sharon had highlighted several dosage increases that she did not recall discussing with her doctor. In the margins, she had written clear questions. Why this sudden change in strength? And, doctor never mentioned adjusting this. A separate handwritten timeline detailed the progression of her health issues, showing a pattern that became more pronounced during the months Thomas visited more frequently for dinner. Deeper still, I found a draft of the revised will with Sharon's signature, already witnessed by 2 individuals whose names I did not recognize. She had inserted protective measures that limited immediate access to large portions of the inheritance, requiring proof of stable circumstances and responsible behavior. She had also established a separate trust designated specifically for our daughter, with instructions that only I held the authority to manage its release under defined guidelines. At the very bottom of the folder rested a single handwritten letter, folded neatly and addressed directly to me. Sharon had written my name at the top in the same familiar script she used for birthday cards and grocery lists over 3 decades. The letter began by saying she hoped with all her heart that her suspicions were unfounded. Yet she could no longer overlook the patterns she had carefully documented. She urged me to remain cautious about any items or food Thomas brought into the house and instructed me to reach out to Linda Ellis right away if her health took any sudden turn. The closing lines expressed her deep love for me and her desire to safeguard the life and security we had worked so hard to build as a family. I spent the next several hours reading every document at least twice, cross-referencing dates and notes. The late afternoon light gradually shifted across the study walls as I absorbed the quiet determination Sharon had shown in assembling all this information while she was still able. She had chosen not to confront anyone openly or create immediate conflict. Instead, she had methodically gathered this evidence and hidden it where only I would eventually find it. When I finally closed the folder and leaned back in the chair, the weight of what my wife had left behind settled over me. The questions I had tried to set aside after leaving the jeweler's shop now stood clearly in front of me. The next step felt unavoidable. I needed to speak with the lawyer whose name appeared repeatedly throughout those pages. The next morning, I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed on multiple documents from Sharon's folder. Linda Ellis answered on the second ring with a professional but warm tone that immediately put me at ease. I introduced myself as Stephen Langford, Sharon's husband of 31 years, and told her I had come across several references to her name in materials my wife had left behind. Linda confirmed without hesitation that she had worked closely with Sharon over the past 2 years on a series of estate planning updates. She recalled how my wife had first reached out to schedule a private consultation because she wanted to ensure the family's assets received proper safeguards. Linda described the initial meetings in detail, explaining that Sharon had arrived prepared with specific questions about protecting long-term financial stability and setting conditions around inheritance distributions. According to Linda, Sharon had emphasized the importance of responsible management and had expressed a desire to build in layers of oversight that would prevent hasty decisions. As our conversation progressed, Linda shared that Sharon had returned for follow-up appointments multiple times, each time bringing additional notes and questions she had prepared in advance. She had requested revisions to several key documents, including adjustments to trust structures and beneficiary clauses that reflected her evolving concerns about how certain family members approached money matters. Linda chose her words with care, respecting the boundaries of attorney-client privilege, Yet she made it clear that Sharon had been thorough and deliberate in every change she proposed. The lawyer offered to arrange an in-person meeting later that week so we could review the complete set of updated paperwork together in a private setting. Linda then mentioned that Sharon had left standing instructions at the firm regarding the handling of certain confidential files. These instructions outlined steps for verification before any significant asset movements could occur, including requirements for documentation and independent review. She proposed preparing a detailed summary packet that would highlight the primary modifications Sharon had finalized in her last months, along with supporting correspondence that demonstrated the careful thought process behind each decision. Linda assured me the materials would be ready by the time we met, and that she would answer any questions I had to the best of her ability within legal limits. Right in the middle of our discussion, my cell phone began vibrating with an incoming call from Colleen. I excused myself politely to Linda, explaining I needed to take the call from my daughter, and promised to reconnect with her shortly to confirm the meeting details. When I switched lines, Colleen's voice came through sounding unsteady and hesitant from the very first hello. She asked whether I had a quiet moment to talk about matters that had been troubling her for some time now. Colleen began by saying Thomas had reached out to her on several occasions over the recent months, with questions that struck her as increasingly odd. He had inquired in detail about my daily schedule, including when I typically visited the doctor for routine checkups, and whether I had spoken about any intentions to adjust family financial arrangements following Sharon's passing. According to Colleen, Thomas presented these questions as expressions of normal sonly concern for my health and well-being, but the persistence and depth of his interest had started to make her feel uneasy. She went on to describe one specific evening phone conversation in which Thomas had pressed her for information about the approximate value of particular investment portfolios and whether I had shown any indication of altering beneficiary designations on major accounts. Colleen recounted how she had tried to give vague answers and steer the discussion toward lighter topics. Yet Thomas kept circling back to those financial details with a focus that left her unsettled afterward. She also recalled another instance when Thomas had suggested the two of them should meet privately to talk about ways to look out for Dad's best interests in light of the changes the family had experienced. As Colleen continued sharing her experiences, I listened attentively without interrupting, absorbing each new example she provided. She described a time when Thomas had volunteered to assist with organizing household paperwork and had specifically asked if Sharon had left behind any recent legal updates or revised documents that might affect the family's overall estate plan. Colleen admitted she had felt a subtle pressure during that exchange, as if refusing to engage fully might create unnecessary family tension, so she had responded cautiously while noting the direction of his questions in her mind. She recounted yet another conversation where Thomas had wondered aloud about my current state of mind and whether I had mentioned feeling overwhelmed by managing affairs alone. Colleen said his tone always remained polite and framed as helpful, but the consistent return to topics involving money, assets, and future arrangements had begun to form a troubling pattern in her thoughts. Toward the end of our call, her voice dropped even lower as she confessed that she had started declining Thomas's suggestions to get together because those discussions inevitably drifted toward inheritance-related subjects. She asked me outright if I had observed similar patterns in any of my own recent interactions with him since Sharon passed away. I responded that I needed additional time to consider everything she had told me before offering a full reply. After we ended the call, I remained seated at the kitchen table, letting the details from both Linda and Colleen settle in my thoughts. The information from the lawyer provided a professional perspective on the steps Sharon had taken to secure the family's future, while Colleen's personal account added real-life examples of Thomas's recent behavior that could not be easily overlooked. I spent the remainder of the day attending to ordinary household responsibilities, yet my mind kept returning to the new layers of information I had received. I stayed committed to handling the entire situation with patience and careful steps, rather than rushing into any conclusions about the motivations of those closest to me. 2 days later, Colleen arrived at the house carrying a thin folder under her arm. She gave me a quick hug at the door before we moved to the living room and sat across from each other at the coffee table. Colleen started by saying she had spent the previous evening gathering materials she thought I should see. She opened the folder and slid several printed pages toward me. The first set consisted of text message screenshots spanning several months. In them, Thomas repeatedly asked Colleen to meet him at a local coffee shop to discuss family financial planning and making sure everything stays secure for Dad. He used phrases like, "We need to get ahead of this," and "It will make things easier for everyone in the long run." As I read through the exchanges, Colleen pointed out specific messages where Thomas suggested she sign certain authorization forms so he could handle paperwork on her behalf. He had framed the requests as helpful gestures that would save me from dealing with complicated documents during a difficult time. Colleen explained that she had initially agreed to one meeting because she wanted to support the family, but the conversation quickly shifted to transferring shares of joint accounts into a temporary holding arrangement that Thomas claimed would simplify future inheritance processes. She described how Thomas had brought printed forms to that meeting and encouraged her to sign them by explaining the language in simple terms. According to Colleen, he assured her the documents were standard procedures that many families used after losing a parent. She admitted she had signed 2 of the forms that day because refusing felt like creating unnecessary conflict. Yet something about his rushed explanations and the way he kept checking his watch left her with lingering doubts. Colleen then pulled out bank statements and loan documents from the folder. She highlighted entries showing large transfers from accounts she held jointly with Thomas. The transfers were labeled as family support loans, but the repayment terms appeared vague and one-sided. Colleen recounted how Thomas had later asked her to co-sign additional loan applications under the pretense of consolidating family debts and protecting overall assets from potential market fluctuations. She showed me the dates when these requests happened and explained that each time Thomas had emphasized how quickly the opportunity would close if they delayed. She continued detailing another occasion when Thomas had invited her to his office to review investment portfolios. During that visit, he had proposed moving portions of her allocated shares into vehicles he managed, claiming it would generate better returns while keeping everything within the family circle. Colleen showed me email threads where Thomas followed up with links to account dashboards and urged her to approve changes quickly before tax deadlines passed. In one email, he wrote that delaying could result in lost opportunities that would affect the entire family's future stability. As the conversation deepened, Colleen revealed that Thomas had mentioned his own mounting financial pressures in passing during these meetings. He spoke about business deals that had not gone as planned and the need for short-term liquidity to maintain his professional standing. Colleen noted that whenever she questioned the details, Thomas would redirect the discussion back to how these steps would ultimately benefit me and preserve Sharon's legacy. He often added comments about how proud Sharon would be if the family stayed united in managing these matters. She produced more screenshots of messages in which Thomas asked her to keep their discussions confidential from me, stating that I already had enough to handle, and that revealing partial information might cause unnecessary worry. Colleen admitted she had complied at first out of loyalty to her brother, but the accumulating requests had started to feel like a pattern of gradual pressure rather than genuine assistance. One message in particular stood out where Thomas wrote that Dad doesn't need more stress right now, as a reason to handle things quietly between them. Colleen then shared a series of credit report summaries she had requested after growing suspicious. The reports showed Thomas carrying significant outstanding balances on several lines of credit, with recent inquiries for additional financing that suggested ongoing cash flow challenges. She explained that she had cross-referenced these with the authorization forms she had signed and realized some of the accounts now listed both their names in ways that increased her own exposure without her full understanding at the time. Throughout our discussion, Colleen maintained a calm tone while presenting each piece of evidence methodically. She emphasized that she had not confronted Thomas directly because she wanted to understand the full scope before taking any steps. Instead, she had begun documenting every interaction and gathering records that showed the direction of his requests over time. She had even created a simple timeline on a separate sheet to show how the frequency of these conversations increased in the months after Sharon passed. I examined each document carefully as she explained the context behind it. The combination of text messages, signed forms, bank transfers, email chains, and credit details painted a consistent picture of repeated attempts to consolidate control over family resources under the guise of helpful planning. The sheer volume of materials and the careful way Colleen had organized them made it impossible to dismiss as coincidence. This was the first time I faced such direct and organized evidence regarding my son's approach to financial matters after Sharon's passing. Colleen closed the folder and looked at me steadily. She said she had brought everything because she believed I needed to see the complete set of materials before making any decisions about next steps. We sat together, reviewing the pages one final time, noting dates and patterns without rushing to conclusions. She answered every question I had about the documents and provided additional context where needed. The afternoon light gradually shifted across the living room as we continued talking through the implications of what she had shared. I appreciated her willingness to bring these records forward and recognized the courage it took to organize them so thoroughly. After reviewing everything Colleen had brought, I made the decision to contact the Syracuse Police Department the following morning. I spoke with the non-emergency line and explained that I had concerns regarding the circumstances surrounding my wife Sharon Langford's passing several months earlier. The operator transferred me to the appropriate division handling cases involving potential irregularities in end-of-life situations. Within the hour, I had an appointment scheduled for later that same day at the station, though they offered to send an officer to the house if I preferred privacy. I chose to have them come to the residence to avoid any unnecessary public attention at this stage. Detective Veronica Holt arrived at the house shortly after lunch. She was a tall woman in her mid-40s with a calm, professional manner that immediately conveyed competence and experience. I introduced myself as Stephen Langford and invited her inside to the living room, where we could speak privately without interruption. Detective Holt explained that she specialized in cases involving suspicious circumstances related to estates, inheritances, and end-of-life matters. She took out a notebook and began asking methodical questions about Sharon's medical history, her daily routines in the final year, any changes in her energy levels or medication regimen, and any patterns I had noticed in the months leading up to her passing. I provided a clear and detailed timeline of events, focusing on Sharon's gradual decline in health. the increasing frequency of fatigue and irregular heart rhythms, and the pattern of symptoms that had concerned both of us at the time. Detective Holt listened carefully, nodding occasionally while jotting notes, and asked follow-up questions about visitors to the house during that period, particularly any family members who had spent extended time alone with Sharon or helped with grocery shopping and meal preparation. She inquired specifically about the types of food or supplements that were brought into the home and whether Sharon had mentioned any unusual tastes or reactions after consuming them. As we continued the conversation, I showed Detective Holt the materials Colleen had shared 2 days earlier. She reviewed the documents page by page with focused attention, making detailed notes on the dates of communications, the nature of the financial transfers, and the context of the authorization forms. She asked specific questions about when and how those documents had been presented, and whether I had been aware of any discussions regarding account consolidations or temporary holding arrangements. Detective Holt explained that these records would help establish a broader picture of financial activity within the family during the relevant time frame, and could indicate potential motives if the medical review revealed inconsistencies. She then requested copies of Sharon's complete medical records from her primary care physician and cardiologist, as well as pharmacy logs for all prescriptions filled in the last 2 years. Detective Holt arranged for the department to obtain official toxicology reports from the time of Sharon's passing and to conduct additional specialized testing on retained samples where available. She mentioned that in cases involving possible tampering with prescribed medication, a thorough review of medication history and blood concentration levels often revealed critical information about substances present in the system that did not align with the documented treatment plan. I signed the necessary consent forms to allow the police to access hospital files, pharmacy records, and any remaining laboratory samples. Detective Holt scheduled a follow-up visit for the next week and explained the standard process for requesting a formal review of the circumstances surrounding the passing. She stated that if initial findings from the records review warranted it, the department could proceed with further steps, including a formal examination of remains to check for any anomalies that may not have been identified during the original certification of death. She emphasized that all procedures would follow strict protocols designed to ensure accuracy and proper chain of custody for any evidence collected. 2 days after her first visit, Detective Holt returned with preliminary results from the additional toxicology screening that had been expedited. The report indicated elevated levels of a specific heart medication that had never been prescribed to Sharon by any of her treating physicians. The concentration appeared inconsistent with her known treatment history and suggested the possibility of external introduction over an extended period rather than accidental overuse. Detective Holt explained in clear terms that such findings automatically triggered a more formal investigation under department guidelines for suspicious deaths, shifting the case from preliminary inquiry to active review. She outlined the next phases of the process, including planned interviews with other family members who had regular contact with Sharon in her final months, and a deeper examination of financial records for any patterns that might correlate with changes in health. Detective Holt asked whether I had any objections to her team speaking with Thomas or Pamela, and I confirmed that I wanted the investigation to proceed thoroughly and impartially. She assured me that the process would remain as confidential as possible at this early stage, while sufficient evidence was gathered to determine the appropriate next actions. Throughout our multiple meetings, Detective Holt maintained a strictly neutral, fact-based approach. She avoided any speculation and focused instead on collecting verifiable information through documented channels. She provided me with her direct contact information and encouraged me to reach out immediately if any additional details or documents came to mind that might assist the team. I spent the following days responding to her requests for further clarification on family routines and gathering additional household records she had asked to examine. The investigation had now begun in earnest, moving the situation from private family concerns into an official law enforcement review. I continued my daily responsibilities while cooperating fully with Detective Holt and her team, providing whatever information they requested in a timely manner. Each update from the toxicology review added another layer to the questions that had first surfaced months earlier, reinforcing the need for a complete and transparent process. A few days after Detective Holt's latest update, I received an unexpected call from Pamela. She identified herself as Pamela Langford, Thomas's wife who had been living separately for the past year. Pamela said she had heard through family channels that an official investigation was underway and asked if she could come by the house to speak with me in person. I agreed, and she arrived the following afternoon carrying a small digital recorder and several printed pages. Pamela sat down in the living room and began by explaining that she had decided to reach out after learning about the police involvement. She stated that her separation from Thomas had been driven by growing differences in how they viewed family responsibilities and financial decisions. Pamela then placed the recorder on the table and played several short audio clips from conversations she had saved over the last 18 months. In the recordings, Thomas could be heard discussing plans to gain greater control over family assets once certain events occurred, using phrases about streamlining everything for Dad's benefit, while mentioning the need for quick access to funds to resolve outstanding obligations. She provided printed transcripts of those conversations, along with exact timestamps. Pamela pointed out sections where Thomas talked about encouraging Colleen to sign documents and coordinating with others to present a united front on inheritance matters. According to Pamela, these discussions had become more frequent after Sharon's health began to decline noticeably. She emphasized that she had kept the recordings because she felt uncomfortable with the direction the conversations were taking, but had not known how to address them at the time without causing immediate family conflict. Pamela also shared text message histories between herself and Thomas that referenced specific financial strategies. In one exchange, Thomas mentioned the importance of having supporting statements from family members to strengthen any future claims on estate portions. Pamela explained that she had distanced herself further when these topics shifted from general planning to more targeted actions involving medical appointments and medication routines. She handed me additional notes she had written during that period, documenting dates when Thomas had asked her to accompany him on visits or to help monitor Sharon's condition under the guise of family support. As we reviewed the materials, Pamela described how Thomas had once suggested they work together to ensure the estate was managed efficiently, hinting that delays could lead to complications with taxes and distributions. She recounted another instance where he had asked her to review bank statements and comment on potential ways to consolidate accounts for simplicity. Pamela made it clear that she had gradually reduced her involvement because the suggestions felt increasingly one-sided and focused on accelerating access rather than long-term family stability. She played one longer recording where Thomas spoke at length about the benefits of having all decision-making power centralized to avoid unnecessary delays in handling important matters. Later that same week, Detective Holt informed me that Marcus Reed had been contacted as a potential witness. Marcus, the jeweler who had known our family for over 20 years, confirmed he had received messages from Sharon in the months before she passed. Detective Holt explained that Marcus had agreed to provide a formal statement about those communications, which included Sharon expressing concerns about certain family interactions and asking him to hold on to a specific item until further notice. Marcus's account added another perspective to the timeline the department was building, particularly regarding Sharon's level of worry in her final months. Detective Holt also mentioned that Thomas had been formally summoned for an initial interview at the station. The summons requested his presence to discuss his activities and knowledge regarding Sharon's final months. Thomas arrived accompanied by legal representation and provided answers to the standard questions about his relationship with Sharon, his visits to the house, and his understanding of family financial arrangements. Detective Holt noted that his responses were documented and would be cross-referenced with other statements and records collected so far. Pamela continued to cooperate by providing additional context during a follow-up conversation with Detective Holt. She described patterns she had observed in Thomas's behavior, including increased focus on estate-related topics after Sharon's symptoms worsened. Pamela stressed that she had chosen to come forward now because she believed the full picture needed to be examined fairly. She offered to make herself available for any further questions the department might have, and even provided contact information for two mutual acquaintances who had witnessed some of the conversations. Throughout this period, the investigation progressed with careful documentation of every statement and piece of evidence. Detective Holt coordinated between the various accounts, ensuring that timelines aligned and that no detail was overlooked. The combination of Pamela's recordings, Marcus's statement, and Thomas's initial interview created a more complete sequence of events for the team to analyze. Detective Holt scheduled additional meetings to clarify certain points raised in the audio clips and to compare them against the financial records already submitted. I continued to assist where requested, answering questions about family dynamics and providing background on normal routines in the household. The process remained methodical, with each new contribution helping to clarify the sequence without premature judgments. Pamela's decision to share her materials marked a significant step in moving the case forward, while Marcus's involvement brought in an outside perspective from someone who had known Sharon well for decades. The department continued its work, scheduling additional interviews and reviewing all submitted materials in detail. I focused on maintaining normal daily activities while remaining available for any further cooperation needed from the investigation team. Each piece of information added another layer to the overall picture being assembled by Detective Holt and her colleagues. The case moved to the next stage when the court scheduled the formal hearing in Syracuse. The proceedings lasted 3 full days in a quiet courtroom on the second floor of the county building. I arrived early each morning and sat in the front row reserved for family. Linda Ellis, the lawyer who had worked with Sharon, took her place at the plaintiff's table alongside the district attorney's team. Detective Veronica Holt sat nearby, ready to testify when called. On the first day, the judge opened the session by outlining the matters under review, including the distribution of assets and the circumstances surrounding Sharon's passing. Linda Ellis began her presentation by introducing the revised will and the protective clauses Sharon had added 6 months before her death. She walked the court through each change in detail, explaining the purpose of every new paragraph and how the language was carefully chosen to require independent verification of responsible management before any large distributions could take place. Linda presented correspondence between Sharon and her office, reading selected portions that showed Sharon's growing concern about how family financial decisions were being handled. She displayed large timelines on screens, highlighting specific dates when Sharon had requested private meetings to update her estate plan and the reasons she had given for each revision. Detective Veronica Holt followed with a detailed summary of the investigation. She described the step-by-step process of gathering statements from multiple family members, reviewing hundreds of pages of bank records, loan documents, and communication histories. Detective Holt explained the findings from the additional toxicology analysis, showing charts that illustrated elevated levels of a heart medication not listed in Sharon's official prescriptions. She correlated these medical findings with periods when certain individuals had frequent access to the household, using precise data and neutral language to describe the patterns without any speculation. Colleen was called to testify on the second day. She approached the stand calmly, took the oath, and began answering questions about her interactions with Thomas after Sharon passed. Colleen described the meetings at coffee shops and Thomas's office, where he had asked her to sign authorization forms for account consolidations and temporary holding arrangements. She recounted how Thomas had presented these requests as ways to simplify matters for me during a difficult period. Yet the frequency and specificity of the discussions had left her uneasy. Colleen provided exact examples of text messages, explained the context behind each one, and answered follow-up questions from both sides while maintaining a steady and factual tone. Thomas sat at the defense table with his attorney. When it was his turn to respond, he spoke in a measured tone at first, stating that all his conversations with Colleen had been intended to protect my interests and ensure smooth handling of estate matters during a time of grief. He argued that any financial discussions were normal family planning after the loss of a parent, and that he had never intended to influence outcomes in an improper way. His attorney cross-examined witnesses, challenging the interpretation of certain messages and suggesting that Colleen's testimony might be influenced by personal family tensions rather than objective facts. The tension in the courtroom increased noticeably when Linda Ellis introduced additional evidence from Pamela's materials. The court listened to carefully selected portions of the audio recordings, where Thomas discussed strategies for managing assets and the need for centralized decision-making to avoid delays. Linda pointed out specific phrases that suggested a focus on gaining quicker access rather than collaborative, long-term planning. Detective Holt was recalled to the stand to explain how these statements aligned with the financial records and the medical timeline the department had compiled, answering detailed questions about the chain of evidence. On the third day, Colleen returned for further questioning. She answered additional queries about the gradual increase in Thomas's requests and the pressure she had felt when refusing certain documents. When Thomas's attorney attempted to suggest that Colleen's account was inconsistent or motivated by sibling rivalry, she responded firmly and consistently, reiterating the dates and details without wavering. Her testimony remained factual and detailed throughout the extended cross-examination. The most intense moment of the entire hearing came during the direct examination of Thomas on the afternoon of the third day. The district attorney asked him to explain his activities on specific dates when he had visited the house and what interactions had taken place with Sharon. Thomas provided his version of events, but as he was confronted with the combined timeline from Detective Holt, the medical records, and the communication logs, his composure began to crack. He raised his voice to defend his actions, insisting that any involvement with household matters or medication had been purely to help Sharon, and that he had no knowledge of any irregularities in her treatment. The exchange became heated as the district attorney pressed him on inconsistencies between his statements and the evidence already presented. Linda Ellis then presented the final set of documents, including Marcus Reed's formal statement about the messages he had received from Sharon. The court heard how Sharon had quietly expressed her worries to Marcus and asked him to safeguard a particular item. This testimony connected earlier events with Sharon's own preparations before her passing. The judge allowed both sides to question Marcus briefly, and his answers added another layer of consistency to the overall evidence presented over the 3 days. Throughout the 3 days, the judge maintained strict order, ensuring every witness had the opportunity to speak fully and that all documents were properly entered into the record. The atmosphere remained serious and focused as each piece of evidence was examined line by line. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following week, giving the court time to review the extensive materials submitted by both sides. I sat through every session, listening carefully to every testimony and legal argument. The process had been thorough, allowing both sides to present their cases without interruption. The combination of legal documents, financial records, witness statements, audio evidence, and medical findings created a comprehensive picture that the court would now consider in reaching its final decision. The court issued its final ruling 2 weeks after the hearing concluded. The judge delivered the decision in the same Syracuse courtroom where the evidence had been presented over 3 long days. Thomas was found responsible for the circumstances surrounding Sharon's passing and for attempting to manipulate the family's estate for personal financial gain. The sentence was clear and final life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In addition, the court permanently stripped him of all rights to any inheritance from Sharon's estate or from any future assets I might leave. The ruling also ordered the repayment of certain funds that had been moved improperly, though recovery was limited given the circumstances. Colleen stood quietly in the gallery as the sentence was read aloud. Afterward, she approached me outside the courthouse steps under the gray Syracuse sky. She looked tired, but determined, when she told me she had made the firm decision to sever all contact with her brother permanently. Colleen explained that the evidence presented during the hearing had removed any remaining doubt she might have held about his actions. She stated she would no longer consider Thomas part of her life in any capacity, and asked that I respect her choice to move forward without any further involvement from him or any mention of him in family matters. I told her I understood completely and would honor her wishes without question. Pamela finalized her divorce shortly after the verdict became official. She contacted me one final time through her attorney to confirm that she wanted no financial connection whatsoever to the Langford family estate moving forward. Pamela explained that she had already begun rebuilding her life in another part of New York State and intended to keep it that way, free from any ties to the past events. She wished me well in a brief, formal note and requested that any future communications, if absolutely necessary, go through legal representatives only. That was the last direct communication I ever received from her. I returned alone to the house in the quiet suburbs of Syracuse later that afternoon. The drive felt longer than usual, the familiar streets now carrying a different weight. Once inside, I went straight to the mantel in the living room and placed the repaired watch in its usual spot. The jeweler had restored it perfectly, and the timepiece now ticked with a steady, quiet rhythm. It was the only physical item I kept from the entire ordeal that carried a direct and personal connection to Sharon's final wishes and the quiet preparations she had made. The house felt noticeably different in the weeks that followed. Many of the rooms that once hosted family gatherings now stood empty and silent. I continued my daily routines, making coffee in the mornings, taking walks around the neighborhood, and tending to the small garden Sharon had cared for so carefully, but the silence carried a permanent new quality. Friends and neighbors offered their support in the form of calls and occasional visits, yet I chose to handle most matters privately, preferring to process everything on my own terms. The legal process had run its full course, and the consequences were now final and irreversible. Thomas began serving his sentence at a maximum security state facility several hours away from Syracuse. There would be no successful appeals that could change the outcome, and no path back to the family he had tried to control through deception and pressure. Colleen kept her word and maintained complete distance, never reaching out to him again. Pamela moved on with her life in her new location, building routines that no longer included any connection to the Langford name. The family structure that had once existed for over 3 decades had been permanently altered by the choices made in its final years. Looking back at everything that unfolded after I first took Sharon's watch to be repaired that ordinary afternoon, I realized how one small, routine errand had uncovered layers of hidden motives and betrayal that had been developing quietly for a long time. Sharon had noticed the warning signs long before anyone else and had chosen to prepare in silence, gathering evidence and updating her documents to protect what mattered most to her. Her actions, though never spoken aloud in her final months, ultimately ensured the truth would surface when it was needed most. If there is one clear lesson I want to share from this painful experience with anyone listening, it is this: pay very close attention to the people closest to you, especially when money and inheritance become part of the conversation. Trust is something built slowly over many years, but it can be eroded quickly by hidden financial pressures and selfish intentions. When something begins to feel wrong or inconsistent in your own family, do not dismiss those quiet doubts or uncomfortable feelings. Document what you observe carefully. Consult trusted professionals early, and be willing to take difficult but necessary steps to protect those you love, even if that protection must continue after they are no longer here. The consequences of choosing to look the other way, hoping the issues will simply resolve themselves, can be far more devastating and permanent than facing the truth when it first appears. I still wear the watch on certain quiet occasions when I want to feel connected to the life Sharon and I built together. It keeps perfect time and serves as a constant, gentle reminder that some truths arrive too late to prevent pain, but they still arrive and bring a form of justice. The house in the suburbs of Syracuse remains my home. It is quieter now, emptier in many ways, but it is also honest. The family story that began with love, hard work, and shared dreams ended not with forgiveness or reconciliation, but with clear separation and accountability. There were no second chances, no restored relationships, and no return to the way things once were. That chapter closed definitively the day the judge delivered the final ruling, and it will stay closed